traigo un tutorial que os va a servir de mucha ayuda, sobre todo para aquellas personas que están empezando a practicar las técnicas del Warzone. En este vídeo es un vídeo de un chico estadounidense que lo explica en inglés. Os lo voy a traducir en español por si os perdéis en algunas partes del vídeo, cosa que no lo creo porque la verdad es que el chico da unos ejemplos increíbles que cualquier persona lo puede entender. Así que vamos a reaccionar al vídeo, dejar debajo de los comentarios qué os parece y sobre todo no olvides darle a la campanita y suscribirte para no perderte más contenido de este tipo aquí en mi canal. Vamos allá.
There are 3 steps to go from bot to pro movement in Warzone, and today I'm sharing them with you because I know there are a lot of people out there going through the pain of getting slammed over and over again by good players, and they aren't sure what to do to get better. And I know that because that person getting slammed was me just a few years ago. But after many months of frustration, I figured out how to improve my movement, and now I consistently drop high kill games. So stick around until the end of this video because I'm going to explain exactly what you need to do to become a movement king. So the first step was...
Va a explicaros todo lo que necesitáis saber con ejemplos súper bien explicados para que llevéis el nivel de Warzone a otro nivel. Quedaros al final del vídeo a tomar nota y os iré dejando la configuración de mando, la zona de entrenamiento y otras cosas que el chico va explicando para que cuando empecéis a entrenarlo, lo empecéis a entrenar de cero y bien.
Something that I didn't learn for a long time. You see, I watched movement tutorials and I learned the basics on YouTube, but what I found out was it didn't.
La verdad que
really
tienes razón, yo hasta ahora no había encontrado un tutorial como este para aprender con ejemplo que lo entiende cualquier persona, así sea en inglés, que el chico está hablando inglés. Primero me lo he visto en inglés, lo he traducido para que vosotros entendáis el vídeo en sí. Y la verdad es que lo explica bastante bien. Hasta el día de hoy, llevo un año jugando en Warzone y me he encontrado el vídeo ideal para poner en práctica toda la mecánica de este juego, que si la controla puedes jugar, vamos, increíble.
In many gunfights. In fact, I started losing a lot more at first because I was trying to use flashy movement. And it wasn't until after losing a lot of these gunfights I realized that I needed to start training like an athlete to start getting better. You see, athletes spend a lot of time doing drills and they practice the skills that they're going to use in a game. And Call of Duty is no different. Movement is not just about learning the buttons you need to press. You have to practice like you're going to play in a game. So for the first step, I'm going to take you through all the movements you need to learn and give you 7 practice drills. And then I'm going to show you how to put all of them together to break your opponent's ankles.
Le ha roto la cámara, el casco y le reseteó el Windows.
We go into a tactical sprint. We press our crouch button to start a slide, and then we press jump to cancel it.
Esta es la configuración que tenéis que tener en el mando para hacer correctamente el slide cancel.
It's just 2 buttons, and you can change the length of your slide by adjusting how long you wait to cancel it with the second button. And there's several reasons why we slide cancel. The first is that we get peeker's advantage, because when we slide around a corner,
es que es increíble, los ejemplos son increíbles.
It takes time for that data to go to the servers and reach the other player, which gives us a really small advantage where we can see that player before he can see us, and it gives us the ability to get the first shot in a gunfight.
Disfruto con el vídeo porque pone un ejemplo. Esta es otra manera de ejemplo de hacer el slide cancel. Como veis aquí a la derecha, él sabe dónde está el enemigo y lo hace de manera inteligente. O sea, es muy bueno.
Causing them to lose track of where you are, which can oftentimes get you easy kills. And finally, it makes you a little bit harder to hit because you can change your momentum very quickly.
Sale,
and a sliding
sale
character
otra
model
vez.
is a little bit smaller than one standing
Da
up.
por hecho que el enemigo le va a pushear otra vez, y es verdad, muchas veces lo que hacemos es correr cuando nos desplaquean y no es así, porque el enemigo, ya sabiendo que te ha quitado las placas, te va a intentar otra vez atacar.
Game, the first thing we're going to work on is slide challenging a corner for peeker's advantage. You first want to find a target, and you want to start behind a wall and then slide cancel out past the wall and shoot at the target. Now, I like using the multiplayer map called Training Facility.
El multijugador es el sitio que yo pondría en práctica, aparte en esta zona de entrenamiento, para hacer esta mecánica. ¿Por qué? Porque no tienes placa, es muy frenético y tienes que estar moviéndote constantemente. O sea, yo he aprendido, que la gente muchas veces me pregunta cómo puedo yo aprender a jugar en Warzone, el multijugador. O si no, la zona de entrenamiento. Son las dos maneras más rápidas que todos los días, haciéndolo 20 minutos, vas a mejorar bastante.
There are a lot of targets to choose from, but you can easily do this wherever you want, including in Plunder. Just pick a place on the edge of the map without many players. Also, I should mention that if you are playing in multiplayer, make
Parece
sure you
fácil,
have the
pero no lo
pads
es,
equipped, because you have them by default in Warzone and they change your slide behavior. Okay, so getting back to the drill. While you're working on this, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. First off, you want to make sure that your crosshair is accurate as you go around the corner.
Mantener la mira en el centro es súper importante. Tenéis la mira un poco abajo y os cuesta entre 1 y 3 segundos. Y esos 3 segundos en este Warzone, tal y como juega la gente, son primordial. Esta es la configuración adicional para que cuando vosotros mováis la mira no se le mueva.
And is as close as you can get it to the target before you ADS. You want to have to make as little adjustment
Siempre
as
en el
possible
centro.
when you go to shoot your gun. This is called your centering. And the second thing to be aware of is how far you slide past the wall. You want to practice sliding out far, and you also want to practice stopping close to the wall, because depending on the situation you're in, it
Ahora
might be
sorprende
useful
al
to do
enemigo a la
either one.
derecha.
The important thing is you want to be in complete control of where you stop after the wall. Now before
Ahí la verdad es que está deduciendo que el enemigo está justamente a la derecha. Es difícil, ¿eh? Cuando entras sobre todo en una casa, casi el 90% de los enemigos siempre se ponen al lado de una pared. Ha sido, supongo que le habrá escuchado bastante los pasos, o habrá tirado o de un UAV, o no sé la jugada que habrá hecho anteriormente, pero se ha anticipado bastante bien el enemigo.
It's important to talk a little bit about how we actually learn new skills. And we simply learn new skills through repetition and through feedback. And what a lot of people don't realize is you can actually develop bad skills if your practice sucks. Because how you practice is exactly how you're going to play in a game. If you rush through this drill and don't practice it correctly, you're repeating and reinforcing bad habits that are going to follow you into a game, and you're probably going to die a lot in gunfights. So you want to make sure that you're taking time on these drills. And it can be extremely helpful to record yourself and watch it back to analyze things that you're doing wrong. I remember when I first started practicing like this, it was really hard. Because when
Uy, si te enseño yo cuando empecé a jugar.
And there were a lot of times when I wanted to just give
Creo
up
que
and
jugaba
play
con el
the game.
monitor
But that's
apagado.
why whenever a drill is hard for me, I try to remember the 3 S's. Now,
Tomar
the first
apunte,
S stands for
entrenamiento,
simplify.
chicos.
Let's say I was working on this drill and my shot was all over the place. Well, the first thing that I would do is I would stop shooting and I would just work on my center.
Parar
And now
justamente
there's less buttons that I have to press and less steps that I have to focus
con
on,
la mira en el
so I can
medio
really work on the
y en el
first things that I
objetivo.
need to do correctly. You always want to simplify something when you're having trouble with it. Like for instance, if you were teaching someone math, you wouldn't start with calculus. You would start with the basics. And as dumb as it sounds, learning to slide cancel isn't any different. And while I'm simplifying
Es verdad,
things, I would also
es
be
cuestión de
slowing them down.
practicarlo,
And this is the second
mejorarlo y ver
S.
dónde
And
tienen
it's
los
something that I
fallos.
learned from playing guitar, which is that when you're learning a new song, you start slow.
Bueno,
and you do
lo de
it
la
right
guitarra no
until
es
you
fácil.
aren't making any mistakes, and then you speed it up. You have to remember that our brains
Lo de
are
la canción se lo
hardwired to
compró.
create habits. If you practice something over and over again the wrong way, that's the habit that you're building, and you're going to do that in a real
Eso sí
game.
es verdad.
So realistically, if you've never practiced slide canceling like this before, it may take several hours of practice.
Un amigo mío, paisano, lo explicó en un TikTok. Mucha gente tenemos la costumbre de acusar a los streamers, sobre todo, que somos a quien debemos, incluida yo, en directo, de que la gente que juega bien, porque lleva muchos años jugando, porque controlan estas mecánicas, de que llevan hacks, lleva aimbot. Gente, una persona que lleva 11 años jugando al Call of Duty, que controla todas estas mecánicas, no le hace falta ni aimbot ni ese tipo, porque es que para ser un buen jugador tienes que controlar las mecánicas, tienes que practicar, tienes que conocer tus armas, tienes que saber anticiparte al enemigo, o sea, tiene varias cosas. Y si tú acabas de empezar en este juego, es imposible que te anticipe y que sepa más que una persona de 11 años. Entonces muchas veces lo que yo recomiendo es que en vez de estar criticando, frutándote con el juego, que si la lobby es no sé qué, que si hay mucho tryhard, que si la lobby es muy campera, mirar la kill cam. O sea, tenemos ese beneficio de la duda de la persona que no mata, y con esa kill cam podéis vosotros observar la manera de que esa persona os ha centrado y a tomar nota y sobre todo ponerlo en práctica. O sea, es la única recomendación para que no os frustréis con este juego, porque hay mucha gente muy buena. O sea, hay gente que con esta mecánica son animales jugando, y si no los controla es que no vas a conseguir nada. Entonces cambia el chip, mira la kill cam, ponte en práctica y verás que al final con el tiempo vas a mejorar, porque todos hemos empezado de abajo, como yo, jugando con el monitor apagado porque no sabía ni por dónde me daba el aire. Entonces cambiar el chip, porque si no es imposible aprenderlo en este juego, y sobre todo a la hora, sobre todo cuando estaban jugando el REY, que sí es verdad que lo juegan campero, Pero también hay gente que juega bien el juego y no siempre está campeando. Solamente que te entra bien y sabe controlar las mecánicas.
To start to get it. Just set aside 15 minutes a day and practice it until you're hitting the target most of the time. And that's the final S, shoot accurately. I know that I've mastered a drill or an exercise and that I can move on to practicing something else when I'm consistently hitting my shots. So obviously that's a bit subjective and based on your own skill, so you'll just have to be the judge of when you're hitting your shots consistently enough to move on to something else. And I also want to mention that for every drill in this video where you're standing up, you eventually want to get to the point where at the end of your...
Es verdad, poneros ejemplos en cada cosa, algo que a vosotros os resulte familiar y que os resulte fácil de recordar, que os ayude a llevar a cabo el objetivo final de esta que al final es aprender a moverte y controlar las mecánicas. Es que lo dice y tiene toda la razón.
Strafing left or right. You always want to be strafing in a gunfight, so you want to practice that way because you never want to make it easy on your opponents. Now the next drill for slide canceling will help you start breaking cameras. If you look at this clip here, I'm getting shot and I know that I'm getting chased out of a window.
Uy, le tiraron
so
un
to break
stun,
this
creo,
guy's
aquí.
camera, I simply fake like I'm going one way out of the window to break his line of sight, and then I immediately slide back the other way to shoot him in the back. So the important skill here is you need to be able to do 180 degrees.
Otro de los fallos, me incluyo yo también, siempre voy a hablar bajo mi persona. Si tenéis la letra máxima, normalmente cuando nos disparan lo que hacemos es, una vez que no quitan la placa, es correr. Este ejemplo que ha puesto es brutal porque tiene toda la razón y luego aparte es que tenemos el hábito de que cuando nos están disparando sabemos que aún teniendo la alerta máxima están detrás nuestro y lo que tenemos que hacer es simplemente esto de aquí. Siempre con la mira en el medio. Se gira y luego apunta. O sea, ahí ya rompes el análisis con el mando.
And the important thing to work on for this drill is you want to get to the point where you're not significantly overshooting or undershooting your target as you spin around to shoot at it. You also want to try to get your spin to be as fast as possible without losing any accuracy. And once you have these drills down, you should start shooting at moving targets. If you have multiplayer, that's great.
Si vais a jugar, por ejemplo, a practicar, perdón, en esta sala de entrenamiento, mi recomendación es que los bots lo pongáis en modo veterano, ¿vale? Poneros siempre en metas altas. Si vais a poner algo en práctica, que sea siempre con mucha dificultad. Si lo vais a poner en un modo fácil, mi recomendación es que vayáis, como lo dije anteriormente, al multijugador o simplemente cuando estéis en el REY y sepáis que hay un equipo campeando dentro de una casa, entren ya sabiendo que os va a matar, pero por lo menos así vais ejercitando vuestra mente, viendo sobre todo los errores y luego practicar. Es la mejor manera, chicos. Yo lo estaba haciendo y créanme que nunca lo he hecho porque he aprendido a jugar un poco este juego a base de meterle muchas horas, romperme la cabeza y hay veces que tenemos que ver este tipo de contenido para mejorar, sobre todo a corto tiempo, porque al final la gente que controla mucho esto llevan 11 años. Yo no me quiero pegar 11 años para intentar entender las mecánicas. O sea, si te lo explica en este vídeo, ponle práctica y verás que con el tiempo vas a mejorar un montón y te resultará muy fácil llevar partidas como aquellos jugadores favoritos que ves en stream.
I have all my custom game settings that I use for practice and multiplayer in the description below. But for those of you who don't have multiplayer, Plunder works really well too. Just hot drop into an area of the map where there are a lot of teams and try to push them while using the slide cancel as much as possible. Remember, repetition is what builds skill. And that's why I strongly believe that if you focus on learning one movement at a time and become insanely good at doing just that one thing, you're going to be way better than the person who tries to learn everything at once. And
ese es otro de los errores que solemos hacer todos, y es que cuando nos dispara un enemigo, nos quita la placa, como veis aquí, y solemos salir corriendo. Él se ha anticipado porque normalmente cuando un enemigo sabe que te ha quitado la placa, al 90% te va a caer atrás y tú ya anticipándote ante eso es lo que tienes que hacer. Irle de frente y ya está. Corriendo no vamos a conseguir más que no mate.
Okay, so now that I've broken down my system for learning these movements and drills, I'm going to go through the rest of these skills a little bit quicker. So the next movement you need to know is the jump shot. To do it, you simply jump while you're in a gunfight. And it can be really effective to help you get more kills because you raise your character's hitbox, so your opponent will hopefully be shooting your legs while you're getting higher damage chest or headshots. I think this movement works great inside buildings where you don't have a lot of room to move around, but it also works great for challenging corners because if someone is, for instance, on the other side of a wall,
nunca
you
disparar,
can jump past their aim and be harder to hit because they're going to have to move their crosshair
siempre
pretty
tienes que
far
estar en
to get on
movimiento.
target. So for drill number 1, I just want you to practice jumping.
A ver, realmente con esto no vas a conseguir que no te maten. Lo que el chico está explicando es que cuando tú vas a un oponente siempre tiene que estar en movimiento y ya está. Porque te van a dar balas, pero de esta manera le va a resultar mucho más difícil, aunque sea saltando, por ejemplo, haciendo el bunny hop, el drop shot, etc. Nunca disparar y quedaros quietos, porque es que si no al final te matan. Te van a dar balas, pero de esta manera va a ser más difícil para el enemigo.
To get used to the feeling of the movement. One thing to keep in mind is that depending on where you aim when you're starting your jump, you may have to slightly lower your crosshair to stay on target. I typically like to aim at people's chests because when I use the jump shot, I end up getting headshots to deal more damage. And drill number 2 is just jump challenging a corner and shooting at a target. This drill should help you get used to how fast your character is moving when you're jumping, so you know how much to move your aim when you're challenging a corner. And like I mentioned earlier, once you get comfortable with each drill, make sure to practice strafing while you're shooting at the targets as well. You also
movimiento
want to
está
mirror
muy
every
roto.
drill if possible. You don't want to be dominant.
Alguien que controla esto es
so
difícil
make sure you take
abatirlo,
time to practice all these drills on both sides if it makes sense. And just like before, once you're pretty...
Y en esta situación, cuando tú entras, por ejemplo, sales de una casa, normalmente el enemigo te espera agachado en el suelo. Si no controlas este movimiento, el que tiene la de ganar es el que está en el suelo, porque para darle en la cabeza y no fallar ninguna balas, tienes que controlar mucho esta técnica. Y lo digo porque me pasa mucho. Si tú lo ves, está de frente, sí, pero si está en el suelo, tienes que controlarlo mucho esta técnica.
All you need to do is press jump again immediately once you've hit the ground, and you can just use the same directional jump exercise from before. Unfortunately, bunny hopping isn't that great in this game because you don't go very far on the second jump. But anything you can do to add a little bit more movement into your game is typically a good thing if you can still hit your shots. Okay, so moving on, the next two movements are really helpful when you find yourself behind a half wall or an object that you can shoot over. Now the first movement is the crouch spam. You basically duck and then stand up repeatedly behind cover, which makes it harder for someone to...
Yo la primera vez que vi esta técnica, que fue en el Warzone 2, cuando vi el mundial del Warzone, dije, qué tontería, ¿no? Pero...
shoot you.
No hay nada peor que ser ignorante.
When you want to hard scope a target, but you don't want to just be standing still. Now, contrary to the name, you don't actually want to spam your crouch button. What you want to do is you want to press crouch and then jump to stand back up. This is way faster than just pressing your crouch button.
Parece que está bailando.
For this drill, I like to pick one or two targets, and basically I'm just going to crouch spam and try to shoot each target. It's a simple drill, but what you'll need to work on is the rhythm of pressing the buttons to go up and down as fast as possible. If you do it wrong, you're going to jump on accident, which is exactly what you don't want. And the next movement to learn is snaking. Now this is very similar to the crouch spam, and it works well in the same situations,
a mí me resulta muy difícil hacer esta mecánica.
Even a little bit harder to hit. Now to do it, you want to go into a prone position and you immediately sprint out of it repeatedly. I like to roll my left analog stick in somewhat of a half circle to stop myself from moving forward. Now the
es presionar hacia adelante, hacia atrás y dándole al círculo todo el rato. Es difícil, no es fácil.
Button timings for this are a little bit tricky, so don't
se
get
agacha y se levanta
if you don't
muy
get it right
rápido.
away. Now snaking did get a slight nerf in one of the recent updates, but it's still really useful in a lot of situations. I like to use it a lot when I'm playing for information. Like for instance, if I get shot in the back and I'm not sure if a team's pushing me or I'm not sure where I got shot from, I like to snake before I start to heal up, just so I know what's going on around me. And you can see that I do that in this clip here, and I eventually locate the person who shot at me and I go to challenge him. But if we get back to the drill, just like with the crouch spam, give yourself a target or two to shoot at while practicing. And once again, once you're good with these static targets, just go shoot some bots or real players and try to use these movements as much as possible in the game. Okay, and now on to a Call of Duty classic, the drop shot. To do it, you simply hold down your crouch button and go prone in a gunfight. This movement is great when you're in a close range fight because when you go prone, you completely disappear from your opponent's screen. This works the best up close because your opponent has to look down.
Siempre que el enemigo sale corriendo y dejármelo debajo de los comentarios si miento o no miento. Siempre que sale por la puerta, siempre vuelve. Este es el ejemplo perfecto. Espérale así y verás cómo lo haces.
really far to see you, compared to if you do it at a longer range where they don't
Lo que
have to
mencioné
move their gun nearly
anteriormente.
as far to get some shots on you. And to practice this, it's really easy. I like to just shoot at a target
Bueno,
while I go
easy,
prone.
easy.
And what's important here is that I move my aim up as I'm laying down, because what I don't want is to go prone and then start hitting lower damage leg shots on my opponent. I still want to hit those
Easy,
chest or
easy.
headshots. Now, while drop shotting is great to surprise someone in a gunfight, it does have some disadvantages. First off, your opponent is more likely to land headshots on you because your head is now the closest thing to their gun. And secondly, when you go prone, you can't strafe or look around very easily.
Si
so
no te
whenever
mueves,
an
estás
opponent does this to
down,
me, one of
baby.
the first things I try to do is jump and strafe around, because you become extremely hard to track for the player that's laying down. So while working on this exercise and shooting the target, make sure to also practice quickly getting out of the prone position by pressing your sprint button and holding forward on your left analog stick. And with this game engine, you can actually do it surprisingly fast. Now, something that used to be a little bit busted in this game was the
Algún
instant
día,
drop
algún
shot.
día.
If you were tack sprinting
Dios.
forward, you could immediately pull back on your left thumbstick while going prone, and your character would lay down almost instantly. Now, I'm pretty sure this got heavily nerfed for controller players, and it doesn't really work all the time, but if you're on keyboard, I think it works a lot more consistently, because keyboard players have a
Para lo que jugáis en teclado y ratón, aquí tenéis la tecla perfecta para hacer esto.
separate button for going prone, and it's not tied to the crouch button. I still tend to pull back on my left analog stick when going prone, mostly out of habit, even though I don't think it works that often. So that's just something for you to be aware of. And just like all the other skills from before, make sure to shoot a lot of bots and practice drop shotting in a game to find out when this works best for you. Now, the
Para
last basic
practicar
movement skills
esta
diving, I'm
mecánica
actually
sí
gonna hold off on
que
talking about it until
a
the
mí me
end of this
resulta
video,
difícil
because
y
there
los
are some
bots
settings and things you
en
need to
veterano
adjust to be able to
no
do it,
consigues,
so it makes a little bit more sense to talk about it there. Okay, so we've made
Sí,
it
la
through
del
all
muro
the
no la había
basic
visto,
exercises, and now assuming you've learned all these movements and practiced these drills to become really good at all of them, the next step to becoming a good movement player is to reach what I call mechanical flow state. Now, flow state is kind of a buzzword, but what it basically means is to be fully immersed in
Utilizando
what
el
you're doing and
estimulante,
focus on a
gente.
single task or activity. So what I mean by reaching mechanical flow state is you have to get to the point where you no longer have to think about your movement at all. You're able to do all these movements together in different combinations, one after the other, depending on what's needed in the gunfight, and it's all just muscle memory, because all you're thinking about
Dios,
is the
cómo se
enemy that
mueve,
you're trying
tío.
to shoot and kill. And the best way that I've found to get to this flow state point is to practice chaining all these movements together in different combinations while shooting at targets. So what I do is I just make up these little movement courses where I try to practice all the movements together in a way that makes sense with the
Wow, practicar todo ya es
cover
locura
around me,
total.
like how I would actually
Dios.
use it in a gunfight. Now, there's an endless amount of ways to do this, but here are 3 movement
La persona que me diga a mí en este vídeo que el slide alcance no te sirve de nada, es que realmente no entiende el juego. Y lo siento para aquellas personas que llevan años jugando, pero es que con el slide cancel puedes hacer muchas cosas. No quiere decir que haciéndole el slide cancel tú vas a ir mucho más rápido, que da la sensación de que pareces Rayo McQueen, pero es que ¿quién no quiere jugar en este juego con el slide cancel? ¿Quién no lo pedía en el Warzone 2?
combos that I think are really helpful. Now, the first is this one, where I simply slide cancel back and forth while shooting at a target. Now, we used to be able to chain slide cancels together infinitely in Warzone 1, but unfortunately, we can't really do that anymore before our attack sprint runs out. So what I like to do is just keep slide canceling until that happens. And I think this drill is really helpful because it gets you in sync with the button timings that you need to chain slide cancels together as fast as possible. Because like I mentioned earlier,
Yes.
slide canceling is great because you can change your momentum and change your direction very quickly, and it makes you a really tough target to track and hit in
Yes.
gunfights. And once you get
No se trata de que va más rápido, se trata de que el enemigo, o sea, realmente tu posición de la cámara es la misma, pero el enemigo cuando te ves y te dispara, le resulta mucho más difícil dispararte y darte balas. Si te queda quieto, como no sea Dios jugando y tenga una precisión del 99%, estás muerto. O sea, es así
good
de
at
simple.
that, the next movement chain is to pick 2 targets where you have to slide cancel around a corner each time to shoot at them. And I think this drill is great because in real matches, there are a lot of times when you need to clear out buildings quickly and check a lot of different rooms for enemies.
Siempre entrar
So being
buscando
able to
información,
accurately center
nunca
your crosshair as you're going
estoy
around
aquí.
corners is a great
No.
skill to have. And finally,
Siempre
we have this
information,
slide
gente.
cancel jump combo. And what I like about this
Joder,
is
jump
that by
back-
jumping
jump
out of the
combo.
slide cancel, you can go pretty
Yo
far
no
in
lo
the
consigo,
opposite
todavía.
direction that you were sliding from. So this can be really
Soy
useful in a
una
gunfight because
bot
you're going to be
profesional.
very difficult for your opponent to track. Now, aside from that, it's
Yes.
really up to you to create your own movement courses. I would just encourage you to try to pair up all the different movements together so you can get all of them into your muscle memory. At this point, it kind of becomes like a game. You just want to keep adding more and more movement combinations to your arsenal and get as comfortable as you can using them in different scenarios.
Hostia.
The overall goal for these exercises is to have your...
Habéis visto, ¿no? En la sala habían dos... bueno, los enemigos, eso, los carteles en el medio, y luego había uno abajo para que tú pudieras practicar el drop shot.
Movement become instinctual and also have it not negatively impact your aim. If you have multiplayer, I highly recommend shooting a lot of bots with these different movement combinations, and you can even practice kind of just dancing around them with movement to see what might work in an actual game. Now, before we get to the final step to become a movement king, there are some additional skills you need to know. First off, we have shouldering or peeking. Basically, this is just quickly popping in and out behind cover for information on what your enemies are doing. I like to roll my analog stick in a circle to peek as fast as possible, and I find that I use this skill the most when I'm
siempre
up.
buscar información, gente, nunca
Just hop
quedarte.
into plunder with some semtex and the resupply perk, and then all you have to do is just blow yourself up so that you don't have any plates, and then just practice pressing your plating button while peeking for information. Now, you always want to be unpredictable, so make sure you work on peeking in every direction, and remember, there are a lot of pieces of cover where you can jump and still get information. Now, the next thing to talk about is using doors. Doors are great in gunfights because they can easily confuse your opponents. Whenever I'm being chased, I like to shut them behind me.
Aquí el enemigo da por hecho que se va, Siempre
also,
entra.
if I know someone's near me, I like to shut a door before I push them, because once again, it's just something that people don't expect.
Baby.
And finally, if I'm low on health and I know I'm about to be pushed, I always try to heal up the corner of a door frame, because as soon as they jump into the room, I'm able to run back out to give myself a little bit more time to heal or to try to reposition. So the important skills here are you need to be able to quickly shut doors as you're running through them. All you have to do is...
Por este motivo siempre digo cerrar las puñeteras puertas. Por esto.
Briefly look at the door and then press...
Todo tiene un sentido, todo tiene un porqué. Siempre cerrar la puerta, hombre.
But you also want to be able to burst through the door if it's not already open and then shut it at the same time. So make sure to...
¿Por qué en la puerta cerrada? Porque el enemigo, si tiene la puerta cerrada, no te va a ver hacia qué dirección tú le vas a entrar. Si la tiene cerrada, es mucho más fácil romperle la cámara. Y sí, gente, esto sí que es una regla de tres. Y esta. Uy, lo de la tirolina. Esto es otro nivel, Lo conseguí hacer este, sí. Este no me lo sabía. Es como que te impulsa un poco más hacia arriba.
Also, if you don't want to fly off the building, you can mantle onto the top by spamming your jump button and then holding forward. I would consider these movements something that are nice to know, but like I said, these things are only going to work against average players. Anyone decent is probably going to fry you out of the air if you try to do it. Okay, so moving on to cars. Now, car plays are great because you can get really easy kills by doing some pretty basic moves.
Easy, lo que se llama easy no. Si te dispara uno, sí, pero si es el equipo entero, estás en mierda.
I don't think the visibility is very good, so most people can't really tell when someone moves. So when I'm driving a car and I see someone, I like to swap to the seat furthest away from the enemy and then lean out of the vehicle to shoot at them, because the car should give you a little bit of extra cover in the gunfight. Now, something you can also do is that when you're leaned out of a window and then press the exit button, you'll actually dive out of the car, which can be enough to surprise someone to be able to hit your shots. Okay, and the last couple of things to cover before we get to the final step to become a good movement player is you can double tap your weapon swap to cancel the long animation when you pick up a weapon, and you can also use it to cancel a reload if you have to use your gun. And then I can't have a movement guide without mentioning stims. When you use one, it gives you a little bit of a speed boost as well as regenerating your health a little
Tiene que
bit
saber cuándo
quicker,
ponerte el estimulante. O sea, para ponerte bien el estimulante, por el ejemplo que el chico ha puesto, siempre tiene que tener activado el sprint táctico para que te dé el impulso extra al 100%. Y no corte esa inyección del estimulante. Si tiene el arma abajo, te va a ayudar a impulsarte más, pero no lo harás al 100%.
Some of this is just to be flashy and make their clips look better, but depending on how it's used, you can actually make yourself a little bit harder to hit by doing this, because you can change directions more quickly on a higher sense. However, something to keep in mind is that this type of movement mostly works against lower skilled players, and you typically sacrifice a lot of aiming consistency by playing on a really high sense. So I personally don't do it. But if you're playing mostly for clips, it can look really cool, and there's nothing wrong with doing it, so you should definitely try it out if that interests you. But just know that it does take a lot of skill to be able to do this and still win your gunfights. And the final step to having good movement is demonstrated in these two clips here, and I want to see if you can catch what it is. In this first clip, I'm chasing an enemy down the stairs.
Siempre se va y luego viene. Es
In
verdad.
the second clip, I'm the one being chased after I get bad timing at a window, and despite being almost dead, I'm
Se
able
va,
to turn the gunfight around
le
and get the
entras.
kill.
No se lo espera.
Now, it might not seem like it, but in both
Por
of these
esto la
clips,
puerta
I did the
siempre,
exact same
siempre
thing.
o casi
I read
siempre
my
cerrada.
opponent's mind. I knew exactly what they were going to do, and I used my movement to get as far away from their crosshair as possible to buy myself time to hit my shots. This stairwell clip
Que
was
Cuenca está
actually
aquí,
pretty
baby.
sloppy because I accidentally changed my guns, but the point
Mira,
is I knew
viene.
he was baiting me to push him outside the building, and I just didn't fall for it. Every scenario in this game is going to be different, but if you can anticipate what people are going to do and then use your
Dios.
movement to surprise them, you're going to get
El
a
otro
lot
lo
of
hizo muy
kills.
bien,
And the fastest way to get to the point where you can read people's minds is you have to aggressively push teams as a solo player. Putting yourself in high stress situations will force your brain to think faster under pressure,
Dios.
and even though you're going to die a lot, you'll eventually start to see patterns and be able to guess what your
Lo
opponent
batieron porque falló el cuchillo y no se anticipó. O sea, tenía la letra máxima y sabía que, o sea, yo, por ejemplo, viéndolo, sé que a la derecha tiene más gentes.
is going to do. This is why a lot of casual players think Warzone pros are cheating, but the fact is most people on the map are pretty easy to read once you put enough hours into playing aggressively. So here are all the settings for my controller and for movement that I'm currently using. As you'll see, I don't have my dive button enabled because I'm using slide only. There's this weird thing with the game engine that you get a small delay if you have both slide and dive turned on. This is something I'm still experimenting with because diving is really useful, so I'll let you know what I end up using long term. But if you've made it
Os voy a dejar en otro vídeo, en la descripción del vídeo, os voy a poner el link sobre este ajuste para que veáis la diferencia haciendo un buen ajuste en la zona muerta. Se mejora bastante. Espero que os haya servido de ayuda este vídeo. Dejadme debajo de los comentarios si tenéis alguna duda, cosa que no creo porque el chico explica bastante bien el ejercicio. Ponerlo en práctica y veréis que al final siempre vais a poder conseguir llegar a ese nivel top de vuestros streamers favoritos. Así que nada, like and subscribe para no perderte más.